35 years ago, a scruffy Long Island native filmed himself taking a brainless leap of faith off the roof of his own house. Even before that home movie was ever shot, Mick Foley's wide-eyed love of professional wrestling spectacles knew no bounds. For better and for worse, Foley's long-time willingness to sacrifice himself in the name of drama and art would permanently embed his place in wrestling history. Foley's time as a wrestler has run the gamut, first making his name as a heartless sadist that could withstand inhuman amounts of punishment. He also made his mark as a lovable ogre, the unlikely Prince Charming that won over fans with his crooked smile and genuine affability. Few wrestlers could ever play ultraviolet Michael Myers as deftly as they could portray the Mike Myers voiced Shrek, yet Foley's versatility allowed him to do just that. We here at Cultaholic are taking a look at wrestling's most cherished hardcore legend, listing off a few Mick Foley facts that perhaps you didn't know. Bonus fact, Mick Foley once presented Robot Wars. I found that out the other day. It was mental. Absolutely mental. Anyway, I'm Sam from Cultaholic.com, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Mick Foley. Join us! Number 10. He once had his jaw busted by the Dynamite Kid. Journey back to the late summer of 1986, a glorious time of leg warmers, hairbands, and a 21-year-old Jack Foley trying to make his way in the wrestling business. And no, that wasn't misspeak. Mrs. Foley's baby boy worked under the name Jack Foley that year. While Mick Foley was a future WWE headliner, Jack Foley was a flavorless jobber whose, well, job it was to make the established stars look Herculean. I think it's pretty interesting that he was called Jack, but there's no word on whether he wears winter beanies in the heat of summer in a perpetual struggle to maintain his hairline, though. In August 1986, Foley took part in the inaugural TV tapings of both WWF Superstars and WWF Wrestling Challenge, losing in tag team bouts at both events. It was at the Superstars tapings in Providence, Rhode Island that he teamed with the renowned British junior heavyweight Les Thornton in a loss to reigning WWF World Tag Team Champions, the British Bulldogs. During the course of the match, Foley tangled with the notoriously rough Dynamite Kid, who gave the novice a particularly brutal clothesline across the mouth. The impact caused Foley to be unable to eat solid food or even close his mouth comfortably for weeks. Number 9. He once wrestled Andre the Giant. The history of wrestling is littered with instances of, I didn't know so-and-so wrestled so-and-so, and this might be one of the most unusual combinations in the sport's annals. In 1991, just weeks after Andre the Giant appeared at WrestleMania 7, the 8th Wonder of the World journeyed to the Orient, where he would square off in a tag team match against another future WWE champion. The match pitted Andre and Mighty Inoue against Cactus Jack and Texas-born super heavyweight Terminator Hoss, and in fairness, it's nothing special. Andre was 1 year removed from looking a bit frail and hobbled in his WWE swan song at WrestleMania 6, and he'd only deteriorated by the time of this brief tag team bout. Andre comes in for a few brief moments of shine, and it's Foley who eats the pin off a wonky-looking giant elbow. Whilst certainly far from a classic, it's nonetheless a curiosity to see two different Pantheon-level WWE icons sharing the ring, even if not in optimum circumstances. Number 8. He once refused to let Jimmy Snuka lose to him. If you know Foley's story, you'll recall that his love for taking gawk-worthy dives and bumps was inspired by the Superfly. When teenage Foley hitchhiked to Madison Square Garden to watch a WWF event in 1983, he was treated by the sight of Snuka performing a Superfly splash off a steel cage onto a prone Don Morocco. That moment has been replayed by WWE hundreds of times over the years, and it took root in Foley's brain. A little more than a decade later, Foley found himself working opposite Snuka on the nationally televised UWF Blackjack Brawl in what would be a lumberjack match. Cactus didn't want to defeat Snuka, but promoter Herb Abrams didn't want Foley to lose. So, Foley came up with an unusual compromise. He and Snuka would go to a double countout in a lumberjack match, where the idea is that the lumberjacks would prevent the very idea of a countout. But a double countout it was, as he and Snuka brawled deep into the seats, unable to answer the count of 10. Number 7. He was once part of an Act 2 Extreme, even for ECW. It takes a lot to cross ECW's remote line of good taste, and by accident, Mick Foley barreled over that marker. On October 1995, during a typical night of unfettered mayhem at the ECW arena, Cactus Jack and Raven warred violently with nemesis Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk. To ramp up the intensity en route to their big match at November to Remember 3 weeks later, extreme measures had to be taken. After Funk introduced a lit branding iron into the brawl, the heel side countered with a steel chair wrapped in a kerosene-soaked towel. The iron was touched to the towel, and Cactus was now holding the mythical fire chair, and that's right about where everything shockingly went wrong. Foley made a move to hit Funk across the back with the weapon, only for the towel to come unfurled from the chair. After scalding Funk's torso, the towel fell to ringside, which nearly led to a chaotic scene inside inside a venue with minimal fire exits. Largely, a crisis was averted, although footage of the incident was reportedly destroyed, per Paul Heyman's insistence. Number 6, he turned down a rather silly name proposed by WWE. When Foley was looking to make the jump to WWF in early 1996, he was informed that Cactus Jack would not be coming with him. Due to WWE preferring to repurpose outside stars with their own character designs, Foley was going to have to take on an entirely new role. But eventually, the world was graced by the presence of Mankind, a sewer-dwelling madman in a leather mask that played with rats and pulled his own hair out. The Mankind name was suggested by Foley himself, in part because the name that was presented to him by Vince McMahon had made his stomach turn. Through Mankind, the world was spared Mason the Mutilator, a rather inane moniker that could have been difficult for even the gifted Foley to credibly carry. At one juncture though, the name Mankind the Mutilator was in play, ultimately just shortened to Mankind. It may not have been Cactus Jack, but it sure as hell wasn't Mason the Mutilator either. Number 5, he doesn't remember parts of the famous Hell in a Cell match. To anyone that watched Mankind and The Undertaker's all-too-real life and death struggle inside Hell of a Cell at the 1998 King of the Ring, the images of Mick Foley crashing and burning are unforgettable. The first tumble off the structure was planned, the second one, through the ceiling, was not, and yet somehow, Mankind managed to admirably finish the grim spectacle. We remember it well, but apparently Foley doesn't. Due to the hellacious bludgeoning he sustained through the course of the match, Foley's memory of the bout is cloudy. It was only after watching the match later on that he knows he performed some of the stuff that he was depicted doing. He would later admit that there were stretches of the match where time passed and he didn't know what was happening. Knowing that and watching the match back, it makes Foley's participation all the more frightening. For the most part, when he's moving around, Foley looks to be fully aware of the spots he's taking part in, but he wouldn't have remembered certain spots had he not viewed the tape. Number 4, he pulled off an unlikely tag team hat trick. Through the 3 faces of Foley, the future best-selling author was able to imbue his own career with a sense of freshness, drawing upon different characteristics at the drop of a hat. Once Dude Love and Cactus Jack arrived on the WWE scene in 1997, the potential to get even more out of an already prolific performer only increased. It was in this time frame that Foley pulled off a rare feat. In 1 year's time, Foley won the WWE Tag Team Championship, not only with 3 different partners, but with 3 entirely different characters. It began July 14th, 1997, where he, as Dude Love, captured the gold alongside Stone Cold Steve Austin. 8 months later at WrestleMania 14, Cactus Jack and Terry Chainsaw Charlie Funk took the belts in a dumpster match from the New Age Outlaws. Then, on the July 13th, 1998 episode of Raw, Mankind and Kane took the belts from those very same Outlaws. Although Mankind was the first of the Foley personas to show up on WWE, it was ironically the last one to win any sort of WWE gold. Number 3, he challenged for the WWE Championship under 4 different names. It's a safe bet that this will never be topped. Although Foley only won the richest prize in the company under one identity, Mankind, he holds the distinction of having competed for the belt with a quartet of monikers. Mankind was the first to get a televised title shot, challenging Shawn Michaels at the 1996 Mind Games pay-per-view. Dude Love would be the second one to earn that opportunity, using the corporate phase of that gimmick when he faced Stone Cold on consecutive pay-per-views in 1998. The year 2000 opened with 3 straight pay-per-views in which Foley contended for the belt, 2 of which were memorable Cactus Jack bloodbaths against Triple H. Finally, Foley rode off into the sunset after competing in the main event of WrestleMania 2000 under his own given name. But me personally, I'm still holding out for Mason the Mutilator, should AJ Styles or Shinsuke Nakamura grant him a shot at some point in 2018. Number 2, he turned down a match at WrestleMania X7. WrestleMania X7 would have been the greatest event of all time with or without Mick Foley as an active match combatant. But how different would the show have been had Foley not passed up an opportunity to compete on the card? The original plans were for Foley to serve as a drugged-out Linda McMahon's knight in bearded armor against Mr. McMahon, instead of Vince's vengeful son, Shane. This stemmed from Foley being fired from his commissionership in December, right around the time McMahon began doping his wife into a catatonic state. Foley, however, turned down the offer, believing that his in-ring retirement from a year earlier should have actual meaning. He eventually changed his mind, but not until 3 years later, when a spat with Randy Orton proved to be too good to pass up. Foley, who ended up refereeing the McMahon brawl, later admitted that he regretted not taking the match, though Vince vs. Shane in and of itself was deliciously overbooked zaniness. Number 1, he wrestled his last match at an indie event. What was Mick Foley's final match? Most would be inclined to say that it was the 2012 Royal Rumble match, in which Foley briefly worked with the likes of The Miz, Santino Marella, and Cody Rhodes, among many others. It was shortly after that Foley, for health reasons, had to bow out of a proposed feud with the not yet called up Dean Ambrose, which would have culminated later in 2012. The fact may be that he hasn't worked a match for WWE since the Rumble, but in actuality, Foley's most recent match took place at a star-studded Omega card in February 2015, before 1,000 fans in a Durham, North Carolina Carolina middle school gym, Foley defeated a wrestler named Mickey Gambino in an impromptu match that was little more than just Foley getting interrupted by Gambino, only to choke him down with the mandible claw. The event also featured the likes of the Hardy Boys, Tommy Dreamer, EC3, Luke Gallows, and others, but it's perhaps most notable for it featuring Foley's last match, as basic as it was. So that's our list. Do you know any more Mick Foley facts? Let us know below. I've been Sam from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter here. If you like what we do here at Cultaholic, you can check out our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. Anything that you can give us will be greatly appreciated and recycled back into making more high quality content. And never ever forget to join us.